As I've said many times before, the most important thing, like the ground level, the engagement you need in order to get into politics, the first thing you have to understand, before anything else, before basic econ or politics 101 or sociology, the first thing you have to understand, the foundation of modern political theory, is Pedocon theory. All right? I think it's very important everyone understand this. It never hurts to go back to the basics, ground your greater understanding in the fundamentals. Okay? So we've talked about the organization Moms for Liberty before. They're a Florida-based DeSantis supporting group of largely fascist, sometimes Nazi moms. They've said some stuff, folks, whose job it is to make life worse. They're trying to cancel sex ed. Now, getting rid of sex ed is not exactly like a niche conservative agenda. They're pretty open about their desire to get rid of it. Now, as we've talked about before, and I always like to reiterate this because it's not talked about much, and it really, really should be, it's that over the past few decades, the average rate of child sexual abuse has gone down. It's gotten less common. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Cell phones and the internet allow people to have a better understanding of whether or not they're being abused and to communicate with others. It's harder to lock people out, isolate them. But a huge part of it is also sex ed. Now, of course, 100 years ago, sex ed was when your creepy coach at school gave you a slap in the bum and said, "Don't even think about it, Bucko," and then later abused you. That was sex ed, a century ago. Now we actually have classes for this where they tell you about the birds and the bees. And conservatives want to get rid of this partly because they want to promote abstinence-only education, because abstinence-only education increases the likelihood of child and teen pregnancy. And conservatives like that because they like the whole 17-year-old girl barefoot and pregnant thing, so she doesn't have a chance to really get into a career. And also, getting rid of sex ed makes children easier to abuse. We have data, not as much data as I would like. I think more research should be conducted on this, but we have data indicating that, it's like oftentimes when young people are being abused sexually, the abuser relies on the young person's not understanding of what sex and abuse are, you know? So I always say, whenever this comes up, conservatives, do you just want to make children easier to raise? What are you doing, right? Well, Moms for Liberty has made things really easy for us on that rhetorical front by flatly stating in a recent conference, a conference called Comprehensive Sex Education, Sex Ed, or Sexualization, where Shenkosk, that's one of the Moms for Liberty, strongly objected to the concept of consent being included in sex ed curriculum. She argued that teaching kids about consent is counterproductive and leaves children vulnerable to sexual exploitation. Now, this is ludicrous, of course, the idea that teaching kids about the concept of consent would make them more vulnerable. That's a non sequitur. It's nonsense. It doesn't even deserve a response, frankly. But I appreciate them being so upfront about it. Excuse me. Kids are often taught to be obedient, Chenkosk said. And to teach kids consent is a shift away from really strongly teaching it's okay to have those really strong boundaries and say no, because not always do kids have that faculty to strongly say no. That's right. She's arguing we shouldn't teach kids about consent because if they learn about consent, they won't know that it's okay to say no to a sexual advance. Like I said, this barely even deserves a response. It is not even incomprehensible. It is the opposite of yeah. Um, Shenkos argued that sex ed classes are quote teaching kids activities for how to consent to sexual acts when the laws in that state may prevent them from consenting to some of these things. She said the concept of consent is quote confusing, and there's a benefit to teaching kids how to say no and how to have these boundaries. So, again, this is nonsensical. Teaching consent means teaching how to say no. That's the point. You don't need to teach people consent to teach them how to say yes. It's not generally why you teach people that. It's completely nonsensical. But it makes a lot more sense when you frame it, I guess, in its appropriate context, when you realize that the only reason this is being said, the reason why it doesn't make any sense at all, is because conservatives want to raise kids. I think the actual subtext of what's being said here is that sexual activity in like the ideology that she's pushing is supposed to be a a sort of conservative and closely taught act, something that's held close to your chest, and where you're sort of deferential to authority figures and their perspective and preferences. Whereas teaching kids consent would give them agency, and they don't want agency. See, what she's saying doesn't make any sense, like, at all, because she's saying the opposite of what's true. Like, teaching kids consent would teach them how to not say no or whatever. But I think that because if you fold this in line with, like, the very old conservative attitudes towards consent and sexuality, it seems like the main thing they really don't like is the idea of children using the concept of consent to reject the inappropriate behavior of the parents, more so than anything else. See, Christian fundamentalists despise child agency, because they think of children as property. I'm not extrapolating here or whatever. I bet a lot of people in chat right now had abusive Christian parents who treated them like property, like like they were just property of the parents, and that's it, you know. Not just Christian, of course, but like in America, it's predominantly a Christian fundamentalist thing. Yeah, I'm reminded. Yeah, I'm reminded of that one podcast where the conservative guy was like, "Yeah, I said, you know, I told my kid to come over here and give me a kiss before bed, like on the cheek." And the kid was like, "No, I learned from consent that I don't have to do anything I don't wanna." And the father was like, "Consent doesn't apply to your dad, bucko." That's real, by the way. That's an actual clip that from a conservative said that on a podcast. That's real. Was that Lawrence Fox? Was that the person who said it? Excuse me. Yes, it was. Okay, gotcha. Lawrence Fox. No, not Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh didn't say that. Maybe he did. I think Matt Walsh said he violates his kids' consent all the time. Lawrence Fox was the one who said what I just said. Either way, you have this recurring pattern of conservative parents despising the concept of children applying the concept of consent to the parent. Because, you know, the parent believes they have absolute dominion over the child. And oftentimes, this just leads to sexual abuse. A lot of the times, I don't think it always does. I think sometimes the conservative literally just wants total control over the kid, and the idea of consent gives the kid more agency than they like, and it's just like a broadly abusive thing. But sometimes I think it's literally just because the cons are pedophiles. And as we know, pedocon theory being a real thing, a scientific theory that's been heavily tested, theory in the same way that, say, gravity is a theory, you know, it's a not insignificant factor. They think consent is a woke word. They do literally believe that. Yes, that is true. Anyway, it's very weird. It's very, very strange. The rest of this article goes on about the rest of the Moms for Liberty conference, but the rest of it is really just like the same conservative dreck we've covered a bunch. I just think it's admirable that a conservative would be so straightforward in saying they just don't want kids being taught about consent, that they would just like say that openly, you know. Really makes the arguments against them a lot more obvious. Florida even wants to control nicknames in classrooms. Yes, that is true. Florida schools nicknames. If you want a better example about like parental control and dominion, Florida teachers now need a parent signature before they may use a student's nickname in class. So, like, you know, if there's like a cool kid in the 5th grade class, and he's like, "Yeah, call me Johnny B," and then and the teacher is like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to ask for a permission slip to be signed by your parents." Really takes the wind out from under your wings, being a cool kid, you know. So that's not good. Little Marco will never recover. Yeah. Conservatives love freedom. By the way, conservatives love freedom. By the way, the state now needs to like directly. So conservatives are a-okay with one very specific kind of freedom, which is freedom of the parent over their child. The Lawrence Fox clip. Oh, here we go. It's genuinely sickening. I can't believe anyone said this, you know? Like, cons in this position are usually given media training. You'd think somebody would have informed him, like, how this sounds.
I started to notice weird things happening with my kids. So the first one was my eldest son a few years ago. I said, "Give me a kiss goodnight," or "hug goodnight," whatever. And he went, "No, you need to ask my consent." And I was like,
"Oh yeah, this podcast is called Triggernometry, and this is not uploaded This upload we're looking at right now, this is not people making fun of what he's saying. This is the actual podcast uploading this.
Do I? And he said, yeah, at school they say you've got to ask consent. And I said, I'm your dad. And he said, yeah, but you still have to ask consent. And I went, okay, we're going to have a little lesson on consent here. Consent is don't touch a stranger's private parts, all right? That's consent. Don't invade someone's space in that.
Does anyone else feel like he looks a little bit like a scuffed Benedict Cumberbatch?
Father. So anyway, I wrote to school and I said,
sorry. Don't allow me to skip.
Strangers' private parts. All right? That's consent. Don't invade someone's space in that part. I'm your father. So anyway, I wrote to school and I said,
sorry, bucko. Zip those pants. Unbuckle that belt. All right? Consent doesn't apply to your father. Literally, that's what he's saying.
What's going on here? Because he's obviously not understood consent. And they said, well, we don't really get to the sexual part of it until later. And I said, well, you can take it from me. I've just taught both of my children consent, lesson 1, in about 5 minutes. And then, I started going, okay, well, where is this stuff coming from?
Literally, he's like, well, hold on, school. What are you doing here? What are you thinking? You didn't teach my child the first lesson of consent, which is that I'm his father and can do whatever I want to him. That's literally, he went to the teacher. Can you imagine being a teacher and being like, yeah, we taught kids, like, you shouldn't do stuff if people don't want. And then he's like, no, you don't understand. I'm his father.
So it comes out of relationship sex education classes and PSHE and stuff like that. So I got some lesson plans from another school and found out what was on it, which is privilege, skin color privilege, gender ideology, diversity, equity and inclusion, all of the things that you just don't want kids being taught at a young age when they're confused as it is. And so I thought...
I do. Notice, by the way, notice how the conservative rhetoric for... first of all, the idea that children are confused, therefore you can't teach them these progressive lessons, as if this guy would be okay with them being taught this at, senior year of high school. What are you talking about? Second of all, I like the fact that we're now using the same excuse for not teaching basic shit to kids that we did for, not teaching kids that gay people exist. Children are confused enough as it is. How do I explain 2 men kissing in the park to my child? How do I explain critical race theory to my child? A real thing that's really being taught to elementary school children.
We got to change that. So we're going to do that as well. That's what which is our next sort of cultural project, which is going to be called Bad Education. We decided to put bad in front of everything.
Nice. I really feel like it's not hard to find this stuff, but you can find a lot of mask off moments with conservatives where they talk about consent like it's another woke term. I remember I saw that recently. It was like a response to it that went viral or whatever, where it was like somebody was saying, look at all these woke things from this media, and one of them was just the word consent. It's remarkable. Here's the Matt Walsh quote. Ah, yes, the classic.
I violate my kids' consent all the time. I violate my kids' consent all the time.
Excellent. And this one's classic.
Throughout his career, Donald Trump has used threats, intimidation, and insult at her.
In American sexual...
And here's how Rush Limbaugh discussed the issue on his show.
You know what the magic word, the only thing that matters in American sexual mores today is one thing. You can do anything. The left will promote and understand and tolerate anything as long as there is one element. Do you know what it is? Consent. If there is consent on both or all three or all four, however many are involved in the sex act, it's perfectly fine. Whatever it is.
So notice how what he's saying from him comes across as revelatory, like this is some big realization. I need you to understand how demonic these people ideology are. Like Rush Limbaugh was listened to by millions of people, okay? I want you to understand what conservatism as an ideology implies and what it means, where one of their thought leaders can be like, I've got it. Those crazy leftists, they're okay with stuff as long as people consent to it. And then that uncritically, on its own, is being presented as some kind of revelation, you know? It's incredible. Just understand that when I say stuff like Pedocon theory or conservatives don't care about rape or whatever, I do mean it. You know, a belief in consent is an ideological belief. Like, everything is an ideological belief. The belief is that anything is good is ideological. That's how morals work. And people often make the mistake of assuming that because we share a country, because we share a planet, that everyone has arrived at the same basic conclusions. You know, like, okay, maybe we don't agree on tax rates or whatever, but surely conservatives don't think it's okay to rape people. And the thing is, if you ask somebody like Rush Limbaugh, do you think rape is okay? In his mind, he will picture 6 black people raping a white woman in an alley. And he'll say, what? No. But if you ask him, like, hey, do you think that a husband should, like, be able to fuck his wife even if she says no? Or, like, hey, do you think that, like, you know, a child should have, like, any agency whatsoever when it comes to their engagements with their parents? Or if their grandpa's being a little bit, like, creepy at a family function, do you think? And then, like, Rush Limbaugh's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And then he'll, like, yeah, Dennis Prager also defended marital rape. Yeah, Dennis Prager explicitly defended marital rape. Keep in mind that marital was legal when both Rush Limbaugh and Dennis Prager became 18, right? Like, they were they were adults. Yeah, this is from an article that he wrote. Is this the part? From Dennis Prager. Correct. Compared to most women's sexual nature, men's sexual nature is far closer to that of animals. So what? That is the way he is made. Blame God and nature. So much of like conservative gender ideology is just boys gonna be boys. Like oh, no self-control, no responsibility. Telling your husband to control it is a fine idea, but he already does. Every man who is sexually faithful to his wife already engages in daily heroic self-control. He is married knowing he will have to deny his sexual nature's desire for variety for the rest of his life. To ask that he also regularly denies himself... Also, what's interesting is that in spite of believing this and defending marital, Dennis Prager will argue for the sanctity of marriage and it being like a natural social institution. But you have to understand, again, conservatives are playing a language game here. When conservatives talk about marriage being like default and natural and normal and desirable, what they're framing that as is an act of temperance by man in the face of God. So what Dennis Prager is functionally saying isn't marriage makes people happy, or marriage is what people want to do, or even marriage is natural. What he's really saying is marriage is what God demands of us, and even if it hurts, we must do it. So they're not even making the argument that it's better, you know, like in an experiential sense. To ask that he also regularly deny himself sex with the one woman in the world with whom he is permitted sex is asking far too much. Okay, so yeah, here's him defending marital. He's saying that if your wife turns you down, that she's like evil or whatever. Deny him enough times and he may try to fill this need with another woman. If he is too moral to ever do that, he will match your sexual withdrawal with emotional and other forms of withdrawal. He's done a lot more than this, too. I think he wrote an entire article on why it's morally necessary for him to leer at women on the beach. Oh yeah, When a Woman Isn't in the Mood, Part 1, from 2008. Sorry, folks, Dennis Prager's just a tiger, you know? He can't control his natural, animalistic, sexual virility. Can you imagine being married to this titan of masculinity and not giving it up for him whenever he wants? Part 2 is better. He lists his reasons. Incredible. In Part 1, I made the argument that any woman who is married to a good man and who wants a happy marriage ought to consent to at least some form of sexual relations as much as possible. In Part 2, I advanced the argument that a wife should do so even when she is not in the mood for sexual relations. Oh my god. Oh my god, dude, look at the self-report. Number 1, if most women wait until they are in the mood before making love with their husband, many women will be waiting a month or more until they next have sex. It's like a cartoon. Every concern, it's literally like that fake Ben Shapiro tweet where he's like, why do young women pretend to enjoy sex with other men where through experience I know that at most they begrudgingly tolerate? It's literally that tweet which was made up, but real. It's that actual, oh my god, dude. Just remember, guys, the literal only reason why we as a society have come to the conclusion that it's wrong to sexually abuse children is because we believe in consent. Consent is the bedrock not only of sexual engagement, but also like taxation, civil governance, basically the bedrock of modern society. It's the purpose of democracy. If a person rejects consent as a value, there is nothing ideologically stopping them from being a pedophile. Nothing, literally nothing. Once you've crossed the gap and you're like, well, it doesn't really matter if the woman wants sex, because I believe I deserve. Then there's nothing. There is no gap. There is no bridge to cross. You're just there. Reason 7, I promise you'll die laughing. I have read this before. It's just been a while, man. Many contemporary women have an almost exclusively romantic notion of sex. It should always be mutually desired and equally satisfying, or one should not engage in it. What? What? Therefore, if a couple engages in sexual relations when he wants it and she does not, the act is dehumanizing, mechanical. Now, ideally, every time a husband and wife have sex, they would equally desire it and equally enjoy it. But given the different sexual natures of men and women, this cannot always be the case. If it is romance a woman seeks, and she has every reason to seek it, it would help her to realize how much more romantic her husband and marriage are likely to be if he is not regularly denied sex, even of the non-romantic variety. Holy shit. Do you think he wrote these and then showed his wife? Like he had an argument with his wife when she wouldn't put out, and he was like, and then went over to like the typewriter or whatever, and then belted these out, and he's like, I have something that I'd like you to read. And then handed them, slipped them underneath the closed and locked bedroom door after printing them out. Prager is currently on his 3rd wife. Funny you said the exact same joke for the last time you covered this guy. Okay. I feel like it's still funny. Okay. Black Poppy, that's obviously not what we're talking about. We're talking about consent in a sexual environment. It's just remarkably common, the conservative disregard for consent. Just remember how it was really not that long ago that marital rape was legal. Like, seriously. When was... Yeah, 1975. Oh, wait, that was when Nebraska eliminated the spousal exemption. 1993. That was when the last state removed the spousal exemption for rape. 1993. That's 1 year before I was born. Which state was that? Like Alaska or some shit? What state was that? Oklahoma and North Carolina. There we go. Both in 1993. Though, even in 1993, after the spousal exemption had been removed from state law, only 17 states had marital rape be treated the same as non-marital rape. Meaning that even in 1993, 33 states out of 50 still had a lower penalty for raping your wife than raping anyone else. So there wasn't a spousal exemption for rape, but it was tried more lightly. I mean, from the article, though laws had changed in every state by 1993, only 17 states had marital rape treated the same as non-marital rape. In other states, there continued to be significant differences in the way marital rape and non-marital rape was treated, such as less severe penalties or excluding situations where no violence is used, or shorter reporting periods. So yeah, it's like a mitigating circumstance. So literally, in court, you could be charged with, and your lawyer could step forward and say, to be fair, Your Honor, she was his wife, and she hadn't put out in a while, and that was a legally mitigating circumstance. Like that, like the judge would have to go, and like everyone would have to write that down and go like, well, that is true. This is real. In South Carolina, for example, currently remains the only state where the force or violence used to threaten must be a higher level. Oh, so in South Carolina, it's still a mitigating factor. Repealed in Tennessee in 2005. Just keep in mind that, like, yeah, Dennis Prager was like an old man by the time this wasn't even legal. And it's some states continue to treat marital and non-marital rape differently. California, Connecticut, Idaho, Maryland, Michigan, Mississippi, Nevada, Ohio, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, South Carolina, and Virginia. There we go. Makes the desire to go back to the 50s even more sinister. Oh, to be clear, when conservative men talk about wanting to go to the 50s, what they mean is that they want to rape women. I mean this, okay? I've said this before. Fascism stems from sexual insecurity. It all comes back to this. Everything from immigration, meaning non-white people get to white women, to feminism, and which means that, women have agency and consent is more respected, to birth control, which means that women have the ability to have casual sex without like risking getting knocked up or whatever, meaning they have more social mobility. Like, all of it stems back to insecure dudes getting upset they don't. This is why there are no fascists who. It's not a real thing. There are like conservative grifters who. But the people who are actually ideologically fascist are too weird and neurotic around women to actually have or enjoy sex. You remember when Andrew Tate like admitted that he doesn't really have sex for pleasure, and he just has sex to like sort of dryly fulfill his masculine role of outdoing other men by having a higher number of sexual partners than them? Fascists can't enjoy sex. They're not capable of it.